On its own, the Kiro Kiro no Mi is a pretty decent fruit, allowing the user to change their own weight, presumably up to 10,000 kilograms. The perception of this fruit immediately changed though once the Tun fruit was introduced, as the two fruits apparently function identically, but the Tun fruit can reach a weight of 10,000 tons rather than kilograms. So why would you want the Kiro Kiro fruit when you can have the Tun fruit instead? Oda even listed it as one of the 4 fruits that had superior variants introduced by the time Volume 79 was released. So it must be that the Tun fruit is just better in every way, right? Not necessarily. And I think this is the case for each of the pairings he gave, which I'm also covering in this series. Despite this one seeming to me like the only one that functions the same way as its superior variant, I actually think this one might have the clearest advantages. The most apparent benefit that I mentioned in my intro video to this series was that Miss Valentine demonstrated the ability to float with her fruit. As a quick correction to that point, Machvise does clearly seem to be able to float in the anime. I guess it just seemed like he was just jumping in the manga, so I didn't remember or see it as noteworthy enough. But we'll get back to that. First, it's time for a quick science lesson. Why did Miss Valentine need the umbrella and updraft in order to float? Well, the simple answer is that she was not buoyant enough to float on her own. The rule of thumb for buoyancy is that an object will displace an amount of fluid with the same weight as itself to balance the buoyant and gravitational forces. If the object is less dense than the surrounding fluid, the buoyant force will be higher than the gravitational force, and the object will float. Miss Valentine could not float on her own, always needing to jump or ride an updraft, so there's clearly a lower limit to her weight. If the user could control their weight in whatever increment down to, say, 1 kilogram for either fruit, a hypothetical spherical individual would only need a radius of 0.58 meters in order to float in air, assuming the average density of the air in one piece is 1.225 kilograms per meters cubed like ours. Machvise is 4.4 meters tall. He would just shoot up into the stratosphere given a few seconds of acceleration time. And no, I'm not saying he trained with his weight increased like the standard anime, gonna take my weights off, now I can pretty much teleport. But like I said, Machvise was clearly able to float in the anime, so he must have been able to reduce his weight, right? Well, that is a pretty solid conclusion that you can make. Difficult to refute that. And because no person could possibly be over 1 ton in weight, he must be able to reduce it well below 1 ton to be able to float like that. Well, that is also a pretty solid conclusion. But this is one piece. People aren't normal. Machvise is a 4.4 meter tall bowling ball. Machvise can be approximated as a 4 to 4.4 meter diameter water balloon, right? Give him a big range. Never know how big of a chunk those legs are. Maybe he does have, you know, almost half a meter in legs there. Doesn't look like it, but maybe. With this approximation, he would weigh 35 to 45 tons without the fruit. So he could reduce his weight by 34 tons and still be more than a ton himself. My first thought was that that would be plenty of a size reduction to float like that. But looking into it more, that would still give him an effective density of 28 to 40 kilograms per meter cubed. I know, spooky numbers, so let's do a comparison. Do you know something else that is approximately that same density? Of course you do. Who doesn't know the density of everything that's around them? Well, needless to say, because everybody knows, the density of styrofoam is 28 to 34 kilograms per meter cubed. I didn't look over at my other screen where that is because I googled it. Everybody knows that. Now, it's probably just a coincidence, but I think it would be kind of hilarious if Oda ran these approximations himself, because that's disturbingly similar. He could have very well thought, what's the density of styrofoam? Okay, let's make this guy this tall and spherical so that we got something to work with. But back to the point I was making, If you take a ball of styrofoam and you throw it, sure, it'll probably float a little better than, say, a baseball or a ball of steel the same size. And don't go into the comments and say, oh, in a vacuum, everything is going to fall at the same rate. We're not talking about a vacuum, we're talking about buoyancy. In a vacuum, nothing's going to float. Just to be clear, I've been saying styrofoam, I should have been saying polystyrene. Styrofoam typically refers to something like this, which is about 2% polystyrene and 98% air. Even then though, it drops. He's way more dense than that, and still that drops no problem. But Machvise's density is actually close to solid polystyrene. This is an example, this ancient piece of technology is an example of solid polystyrene. You think that's gonna float? No. But anyways, he's clearly less dense than that. You wouldn't be floating around like that if you were a ball of styrofoam. So he can probably reduce his weight further than that, but what's the limit? Well, probably whatever you have left after subtracting the increment implied by the fruit's name, giving us decent evidence that the changes in weight do in fact require increments of 1 kilogram for the Kiro Kiro no Mi and 1 ton for the ton no Mi. So if you were to be 1,052 kilograms and you had the ton no Mi, you could reduce your weight down to, I don't remember what I said. So if Machvise were 39,420 kilograms, he would be able to reduce his weight down to 420 kilograms. Similarly, if Miss Valentine were 70.3 kilograms at some point in time, she could reduce her weight down to 0.3 kilograms. If you're going to use the fruit the way Machvise does, this would obviously make his fruit superior for people like him who weigh more than 1 ton normally. In fact, he really should start watching his weight so he can really just fly. Get your weight in that range just above an increment of 1 ton, and you can pretty much just rock it off as fast as you want. But what about for normal people? Best case scenario, you can't reduce your weight. Worst case scenario, you can't reduce your weight, and you suddenly weigh a literal ton. But now that we've fairly firmly established the increments, we have another benefit. Control. Granularity. For the ton fruit, your ability is basically an on-off switch for standing on something and breaking it. That's it. The most obvious combat benefit this granularity brings is what Mikita or Miss Valentine did to Usopp. Slowly increase to quite literally put the pressure on. Great for goofing around or getting information. You want to catapult someone with a lever or slingshot yourself? You have much more control with the Kiro Kiro fruit. Don't want to be carried somewhere but don't want to destroy the floor or the person carrying you? No problem with the Kiro Kiro fruit. Want to be easier to carry? Not possible for a normal person with the ton fruit. On that note, devil fruits still work in the water. You're just weakened. You can't sink with the Kiro Kiro fruit. In fact, you would probably be able to just float so much that you won't even be able to be submerged enough to be weakened. No risk of drowning, effectively completely bypassing the weakness of devil fruit, aside from sea prism stone. Unless you normally weigh over a ton, you will still be an anchor with the ton fruit. The wiki does also say that Machvise's devil fruit can hurt him, which would be why he uses the shield, and that would definitely be a point in favor of the Kiro Kiro no Mi. But the wiki also says that it hasn't been shown that he can float, and I think he's probably mostly getting hurt because he's belly flopping onto solid ground. Belly flops hurt enough in the water. Can you imagine how terrible it would be on solid ground? Of course, if it just so happens that you can adjust your weight in whatever increment for either fruit and the only difference between the two is the maximum weight, then the ton fruit is actually just a straight improvement. It might be easier to be more precise with the Kiro Kiro fruit. I mean, think about what it's like clicking and dragging a massive scroll bar, but that would be a pretty minor benefit. I would still consider, for instance, Ares power to be better than someone who could only turn something back, say, 5 seconds, even if some people need to get erased before being able to control it. Now for a disclaimer for the science pedants out there like me. I would have put this at the beginning, but I feel like that would result in a pretty terrible audience retention. Mass and weight are different. Kilograms and metric tons are units for mass. But, as you may have noticed, I kept referring to their weight. Devil fruits are weird. Nami and Vivi were able to knock Mikita away when she weighed 10,000 kilograms, so it seems like the fruit decouples the user's weight and mass, only increasing the weight or force due to gravity. If I had to guess, I would say each fruit increases the user's weight in increments of the amount you would expect of the increase in mass at 1G. That would be about 9.8 newtons for the Kiro Kiro fruit and about 9,800 newtons for the ton fruit. I was really not expecting this one to be sciencey at all, so buckle up because I was expecting the 2 that I still have to go to be very sciencey. So who knows how crazy they're gonna be.